Hello again. It's time now to check in with the Money Desk. Devin Murugan standing by. Good afternoon, Devin. See, now for about 2 years we've had record low interest rates, and it's so many people taking the leap to buy property. Interest rates are now starting to rise. How will this impact on the interest for property?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Bradian. Good afternoon. Interest rates look like they are on a cycle to go upwards, and you're quite right. We did have record low interest rates, and it caught the eye of many of the home buyers, as you correctly say. Now, the latest data from home loan comparison service Ooba reveals that competition among the major banks in South Africa is continuing to surge. In fact, home loan approval rates were up by 3.1% late last year. I want to move over now to Careen Mckinon from Ooba. She joins us now just to get clarity on a few things that emerged from the survey. Careen, thanks indeed for joining us. Let's start with the fact that your latest survey shows that for the latter part of last year, bank approval rates were actually up, and I'm thinking that banks still have that appetite to grant loans.
100%, Devin. So the competition amongst the major banks in South Africa competing for a bigger share of the home loan market remained extremely fierce during the last quarter of 2021. And we've seen them competing for business through strong interest rate discounts and approving more deals. So they are definitely wanting to gain more market share, which is driving the property market.
And it's interesting because, as we said in our preamble to this, that the Reserve Bank had the interest rate for the reasons that they did, given COVID impacts and so forth, the lowest on record. But the big question now is whether or not this expected interest rate hike cycle, as we apparently are seeing, will that change things? Because people would have planned to buy property perhaps for the first time last year, and come late last year we had the slight uptick in interest rates. Will that change the landscape in any way?
So it could definitely change the landscape, certainly in some of the more affordable markets. But overall, should the interest rates go up, and we are expecting them to rise this year, anything between 0.75 and 1%, but that's still relatively positive based on where we've come from. So if you look at where the interest rate was pre the 2020, pre the global pandemic, we were still at the level of 10%. So even if we go up and the interest rates get to 8%, that is still 2% less than where we were tracking 2 years ago. The other factor to consider is, even though it will affect the affordability for certain customers, the average increase, should the rates rise by 0.25% on a R1 million bond, that is an additional installment payment of about 150 Rand a month extra. So we are still seeing that potentially the market's going to have very favorable lending conditions for home buyers.
In other words, what you're saying, there's still some time to go before we see that interest rate that we saw pre-COVID. Are property prices going up because of the interest? I mean, I know that's a broad question, but what does the survey reveal?
So we have seen property prices increase, and we've seen that increase depending on where we are from a regional perspective. So, for example, the Free State, we definitely saw some very positive house price growth, about 15% year on year. That's obviously coming off a slightly lower base. If you compare the average property price in the Western Cape, which is the highest in the country, sitting at 1.8 million, however, the property showed relatively lower growth overall, of tracking at about 7% in the Western Cape. And then Gauteng North and West, where we have the second highest average purchase price, they were tracking at an overall growth rate of about 5%. So it does vary from region to region, depending on the markets. But we are still seeing price growth, which is positive.
And before I let you go, Careen, I mean, with this apparent cycle coming up now, as you said, we expect the Reserve Bank to up interest rates a few times this year, albeit in small chunks. What is happening with the renting market? Because that's one option that people could take. Do you see this impacting in any way as the rates go up?
We do. So, as we saw coming out of the initial hard lockdown that we were in, we saw that people that were renting were shifting to purchase property because the rates were so low. So we will see a movement of some potential home buyers that are impacted by the affordability going forward with rate increases. They potentially could shift back to renting, and the rental market then being stimulated with more potential tenants would definitely drive some property investors to purchase and drive market for rent-to-buy perspective.
All right, so it'll be interesting to see what happens with property this year. Careen Mckinon from Ooba, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.